The American dream, a beacon of hope, a promise of prosperity and upward mobility. In the 1960s, this dream felt tangible for many Americans. The horrors of World War II were fading into memory, and a new era of peace and prosperity seemed to dawn. The American dream at its core was about opportunity. It was about the chance to achieve success through hard work and determination. For many, this meant owning a home, a car, and providing a good education for their children. The 1960s painted a picture of this dream on television screens and in magazines. It was an era of optimism, a belief that anything was possible in America. However, this seemingly idyllic picture masked a more complex reality. The American dream of the 1960s was not equally accessible to all. This decade of promise was also a decade of profound social and political upheaval. The fight for civil rights, the escalating Vietnam War, and changing cultural values would all leave their mark on the American dream. The end of World War II brought a wave of optimism to the United States. Returning soldiers were eager to start families and rebuild their lives. The government, in turn, implemented programs like the GI Bill. This bill made home ownership and higher education accessible to millions of veterans. This period witnessed the rise of suburbia. Affordable housing developments sprang up around major cities. Families flocked to these suburbs, drawn by the promise of space, security, and a better life for their children. The suburbs became synonymous with the American dream. This suburban boom fueled economic growth. The demand for cars, appliances, and consumer goods soared. The American economy thrived. Yet, beneath this facade of prosperity, tension simmered. Not everyone benefited equally from this economic boom. Many minority groups found themselves excluded from the prosperity of the suburbs. The American dream, it seemed, was not a universal reality. The civil rights movement exposed the stark contradictions at the heart of the American dream. While many white Americans enjoyed prosperity and opportunity, African Americans continued to face discrimination and segregation. They were denied equal access to housing, education, and employment. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X emerged, demanding equality and justice. The civil rights movement challenged the nation to live up to its ideals of liberty and equality for all. The struggle for civil rights was met with fierce resistance. Peaceful protests were met with violence. The nation watched in horror as the realities of segregation and discrimination played out on their television screens. The civil rights movement forced America to confront the hypocrisy of its dream. It highlighted the gap between the nation's ideals and the reality experienced by millions of its citizens. The struggle for equality would continue to shape the American dream for decades to come. The 1960s also witnessed a profound shift in gender roles. The traditional image of the American dream, with the father as the breadwinner and the mother as the homemaker, began to be challenged. Women, inspired by the civil rights movement, began to demand equal rights and opportunities. The publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in 1963 gave voice to the frustrations of many women who felt stifled by the limitations of their domestic roles. Women wanted more than just a house in the suburbs and a family to care for. They sought fulfillment in education, careers, and personal growth. This cultural shift led to the rise of the women's liberation movement. Women fought for equal pay, reproductive rights, and an end to gender discrimination. The American dream was being redefined. It was no longer solely about material prosperity, but also about personal fulfillment and equality for all, regardless of gender. As the decade went on, the Vietnam War cast a long shadow over the American dream. At first, the war was met with support, but it didn't take long for it to become deeply unpopular. The horrors of the war, broadcast into living rooms night after night, shattered the nation's sense of innocence and optimism. It divided the nation in ways that were hard to ignore. Young people especially started questioning the government's motives and even the meaning of the American dream itself. Was it really worth sacrificing lives for? Was chasing material wealth and security worth the cost of war and the social unrest it brought? The Vietnam War left a profound mark on the American psyche. It eroded trust in the government and, fueled a growing sense of disillusionment. It also exposed the limits of American power and revealed just how complex the world beyond its borders truly was. The disillusionment and unrest fueled by the Vietnam War gave rise to a vibrant counterculture. Young people, disenchanted with the materialistic values of their parents, sought alternative ways of life. They questioned traditional social norms, embraced peace and love, and explored spirituality and self-discovery. This counterculture movement rejected the traditional American dream of material success and conformity. Instead, they sought a different kind of dream, one based on peace, love, and individual expression. They experimented with communal living, challenged traditional sexual mores, and embraced music and art as forms of protest and self-expression. This youth-led movement, it challenged the very fabric of American society. It questioned authority, embraced diversity, and sought to create a more just and equitable world. While the counterculture movement eventually faded, its impact on American culture and values was undeniable. It expanded the definition of the American dream, incorporating ideals of social justice, environmentalism, and personal fulfillment. The economic landscape of the 1960s was not without its turbulence. While the early part of the decade saw a continuation of the post-war economic boom, by the late 1960s, cracks began to appear. Inflation started to rise and the economic growth rate slowed. The Vietnam War played a role in this economic instability. The massive spending on the war effort contributed to inflation. The government's focus on the war effort also diverted resources away from domestic programs. This, in turn, fueled social unrest and economic anxiety. These economic shifts added another layer of complexity to the American dream. The promise of upward mobility and economic security felt, less certain. The gap between the rich and the poor began to widen, and the dream of achieving financial stability through hard work alone seemed increasingly out of reach for many. The 1960s began with such promise, a time of optimism and belief in the American dream. However, the decade ended on a more somber note. The assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert F. Kennedy shook the nation to its core. The Vietnam War raged on, further dividing the country. The optimism of the early 1960s had given way to a sense of disillusionment and uncertainty. The American dream, once a beacon of hope, seemed tarnished, its promise of equality and opportunity elusive for many. The decade exposed the deep-seated social and economic inequalities that plagued American society. Yet, the 1960s also left an indelible mark on the American dream. The civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement, and the counterculture movement all challenged the status quo, demanding a more inclusive and equitable society. They expanded the definition of the American dream, incorporating ideals of social justice, individual expression, and personal fulfillment. The American dream of the 1960s was a dream in transition, a dream both challenged and redefined. It was a decade that forced America to confront its contradictions, its promises of equality and opportunity juxtaposed against the realities of discrimination and injustice. The legacy of the 1960s is one of both progress and unfulfilled promises. The movements for social justice and equality that emerged during this tumultuous decade continue to shape American society today. The struggle for civil rights, women's rights, and LGBTQ+ rights are all rooted in the activism and idealism of the 1960s. The American dream remains a powerful and enduring ideal. It continues to evolve and adapt to the changing realities of American life. While the dream may look different for each generation, Its core values of opportunity, equality, and the pursuit of a better life remain deeply ingrained in the American spirit.